Hello historians, welcome to part 2 of the Unit 6 review, 1865 to 1898, 13% of the exam. Now, overview, like we have said, this unit is going to cover the end of the Civil War. We're going to see some quite a bit of expansion. We're going to see progressive movements rising. We're going to see the Gilded Age, monopolies, all that kind of stuff. And it's going to end with the Spanish-American War. Let's start off with Native Americans. You guys should definitely know about the Dawes Act during this period, which is 87. What happens here is the U.S. government gets the idea that they will end tribal unity by taking their land, taking those tribal lands, and dividing it up into a certain amount of acres per family, okay? So what that's supposed to do is get rid of their traditional tribal way of living and force them to live like Westerners do with private property and things like that. Now, the Dawes Act, a lot of the land that they're supposed to subdivide and give to these Native American families doesn't end up in natives' hands, okay? As you can tell by this poster from the time, they are going to sell quite a bit of it to white settlers. So not only are they ruining their way of life by making them have private property, but they're also going to strip away a ton of that traditional tribal land once again. You should also know the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890. There was a movement among the Sioux. They're called the Ghost Dancers, and they felt that if they got rid of all Western culture in their society, they would basically be closer to their traditions, and they would be able to get rid of whites in America. Now, the U.S. is not going to like that, and in 1890, 150 of these ghost dancers are going to be killed by U.S. troops. And this is an image from that massacre. You can see the dead natives are buried in a mass grave here. So very brutal, but you can see in history that Native Americans are going to get their land and lives taken away continuously throughout U.S. history. Women in Unit 6. You should know about the National American Women's Suffrage Association, the NAWSA, that is formed in 1890. Now, you can see women are getting even more frustrated about not having those voting rights, so they form this association, again led by Elizabeth Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, both major suffragettes and women's rights advocates, so know about that association there. Now, why are women forming this association at this time? The reason is because they're seeing a little bit more freedom as the economy grows in the North, okay? As we get more industrialized in the North, jobs are going to open up, like being operators, being secretaries for these big businesses in the North. The South, that does not happen, okay? Women still have that cult of domesticity. They're still supposed to be obedient and stay at home. But in the industrialized North, we see that women are gaining a little bit of freedom and having jobs. Now, this doesn't mean that they are, working while their kids are at daycare. Women who have jobs are supposed to not be married, and they're supposed to, once they get married, quit that job and be a mother. Okay, so this isn't like modern day women having careers. It's still pretty restricted at that time. Okay, African Americans in Unit 6, we talked about this in the last video, but it's important to reiterate for this unit as well. If you remember, we have those Reconstruction Amendments in this time period, and those are supposed to end slavery. They're supposed to give African Americans the right to vote. They're supposed to give African Americans equal protection under the law. But they are going to continue in the South to have restricted rights with sharecropping, which is slavery 2.0, and poll taxes, which blocks them from voting. And a really big development at this time is Plessy versus Ferguson, which takes away that equal protection under the law. Now, the court in this case says they have equal protection, but they can be separate, okay? So you can have two separate train cars, one for blacks, one for whites, and as long as it's equal, it is constitutional. Now, that may sound nice on paper, but obviously in practice, it doesn't work that way. Blacks are always going to have way worse conditions in their train cars and drinking fountains and schools and all that stuff. But Plessy versus Ferguson allows separate but equal, and this forms the Jim Crow laws, which again we talked about last time, but that is these laws of segregation and keeping blacks down in the South. You should know that there is some unique resistance during this time period from Booker T. Washington, this fella right here, and he says that blacks should get job training, and he opens this institute called the Tuskegee Institute. Tuskegee Institute, and that institute's goal is to train blacks in jobs like factories, being foremen, things like that, where they can get equality by education, which is a very cool idea. Now, what about immigrants and foreigners? Like we talked about last time, we have growing nativism. Now, why is that? We're having more immigration from different areas in the world during this period. We have Chinese coming in from the West, and that is going to lead to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Now, this is important because it's going to prohibit all immigration of Chinese laborers. Eventually, they'll pass laws to ban Chinese women from coming in as well. But basically, no more Chinese are allowed into the United States. Now, this is the first law banning immigration based on a nationality or an ethnicity. So you can see that nativism is really growing even in Congress, where they're passing laws banning specific races from entering into America. We also see a new kind of immigrant called the new immigrants. Before, we were having a lot of immigrants coming from Ireland, if you take a look at this graph, right? So we have a lot of Irish immigrants, then we get a lot of German immigrants here, and now we're getting immigrants from the South and East European countries like Italy, Russia, Hungary, Poland, places like that, right? And that's going to cause some tension because those are Catholic countries mostly, and so Americans are Protestants. They don't like these new Catholics coming into the country. And like those Irish, they're going to be moving to the industrial north to work in factories. You can read The Jungle, which is an excellent book about a Polish family who moves to the north to work in a meat factory. Excellent book to reference as well. So there you go, new immigrants. So what do we got cooking for technology, culture, and reform during Unit 6? Some important technologies you should know. Nikola Tesla is going to come out with the alternative current, which is going to make electricity much more available to Americans. And with that electricity, they can use the light bulb invented by Thomas Edison to now power and light their factories. So know about those two inventions. Obviously, that is going to be a big boom as well to our economy, being able to light your factories, run them 24 hours a day. It essentially doubles your production. So those are very important technologies. Now, reform. The first big one is the social gospel movement, okay? I call this the What Would Jesus Do movement because basically they want to better this new industrial society by acting as Jesus, right? By using the principles of Christianity like charity and togetherness to help the fellow Americans and kind of create a better country. So you can see, again, this is kind of like that progressive movement, but social instead of economic. We also have a very important writer, Mark Twain, at this time. Samuel Clemens is his real name, but you can just use Mark Twain, that's fine. And he is going to write books about social justice, okay? He's going to write Huck Finn and Mark Twain, and both of those books are about acceptance and anti-racist themes and things like that, right? So he's actually the one who coins the term Gilded Age, meaning that America may look really nice at this time, but underneath it is a pile of doo-doo. You should also know Jane Addams and her Whole House. Now the Whole House is not, it started as one house, but it's going to end up being a series of houses, so it's more like an institution, and it's to support and educate immigrants coming into the North. Okay, so again, a little more progressive action with Jane Addams and her Whole House. We see early temperance movements here too, with the Anti-Saloon League in 1893. You get posters like this: the saloon are the boys and girls, meaning are you going to choose alcohol, or are you going to make good boys and girls for America? Now in the West, we have the Frontier Thesis by Mr. Jackson Turner over here, and this is very important for American identity, okay? Turner is basically going to say that America is, we need a frontier to be real Americans, right? It's why we're so individualistic, why we're so willing to experiment with new ideas, is because we always have the frontier to go and try new things and to grow as a nation. And obviously, this is important because our frontier is running out. So this Turner is going to push the idea that we always need room to grow, and that's that frontier thesis, manifest destiny, right? Imperialism eventually, so that's very important. We also see conservation becoming a big deal. John Muir is going to start the Sierra Club. There's a quarter that's kind of celebrating that idea, but it's to protect the new lands out west, the nature out west that we're finding as we expand. We also see the Department of the Interior, which is made to protect these new lands and to kind of regulate how much people are abusing nature. Not all that effective. We're going to have to wait for good old Teddy Roosevelt to step in and really ramp up conservationism. But know the Sierra Club and the Department of Interior. We also, in the North, have the Industrial Revolution, brought to you by laissez-faire policies, which is no regulation, hands off of the economy, let the businessmen do what they want to do. And that's going to lead to a boom in business in the North, okay? That is also going to lead to a small middle class developing. Not big at this time, but they're starting to emerge, and that's going to lead to like theme parks and baseball and fun activities because people have a little bit of money at this time. You're also going to see urbanization with things like tenement housing built for these super poor immigrants to live in. Oftentimes there's a few families per one bedroom apartment, so very, very crowded conditions. You see child labor existing at this time, with kids starting to work at very young ages, put in very dangerous positions, so know about that. We will have social Darwinism as well. You guys might remember eugenics from class, where there's new science, in quotes, that says that white people are better than all other races because whites have cities, they occupy the most technologically advanced civilizations, and this must be due to their race, when really it was due to luck of access to resources and history and things like that, okay? But do know social Darwinism. We also see political machines. Now, how this works, politicians are going to exchange favors for votes, especially in these with immigrants in these urban areas, okay? Famous for this is William Boss Tweed in New York, who will exchange jobs, food, meals, cash even, for these immigrants to go vote for him, which leads to him getting more and more power, and he's going to embezzle a bunch of tax money. Famously, he'll build a building that was supposed to cost, I'm just making these numbers up, but like $2 million, and then he charges $10 million for it and pockets a bunch of money. Do know about those political machines, and Boss Tweed is a good example to have in your back pocket. As far as the federal government and its relationship with states and individuals, the big thing is the Interstate Commerce Commission. And this is going to be the feds telling the states, hey, we regulate trade between states, not you guys. We have the power over trade. Okay, and this is big because once again, we're seeing that federal government grow in power more and more with each of these units. So we see that developing with that Interstate Commerce Commission. All right, let's summarize this bad boy up with some turning points. First off, that compromise of 1877, when Reconstruction is going to end, is obviously a huge turning point, and we enter Plessy versus Ferguson, the Jim Crow era in the South, with those Southerners having separate but equal as the new constitutional law. Spanish-American War is also huge because this is when America becomes a proper empire with overseas colonies. So I would argue that those three are the major turning points of this unit. Now, sub-periods, we have the Reconstruction period from 65 to 77, which is illustrated right up here. We have the Gilded Age, which is more of a northern thing, but know that the Gilded Age is when big business, I had the picture in the background the whole time, but you have big monopolies versus the little guy, and America may look really wealthy from the outside, but on the inside it's rotten and immigrants are abused and all that stuff. We have the Jim Crow era in the South, which is going to go all the way to 1965, so it extends way beyond this unit, but just know that the Jim Crow era is happening with that Plessy versus Ferguson law. We also have the American Empire being created and expanding. You could argue that America was always an empire because it was always stealing land and constantly going west, but now we have overseas territories, which some historians say is what you need to be an empire. So you can see us gathering more of that. Now, changes. Like I said, we have an overseas empire now at this point. That is a huge change in American history. We have rising tensions between the rich and the poor, with those robber barons versus the labor movement and strikes and unions and things like that. So these are all new, or growing at least, developments in history at this time. Things that are continuous, women are going to continue to fight for their rights. Right, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton are going to continue to fight for those rights. We have continuing manifest destiny. We've run out of frontier. We're going to go find some new frontier overseas. You could argue that America still does this today and is still trying to expand, although by different methods. We see growing nationalism with the beating of the Spanish in the Spanish-American War. So America is going to continue to feel more confident in itself, and nationalism will grow. The South is still going to be a plantation economy, despite slavery being outlawed and blacks given rights. They continue to be oppressed, and that is going to stay continuous through this unit. Now, how would you characterize this thing? Is it purely the Gilded Age unit as many teachers teach it? Is it something more? Is empire more important than what's happening at home? Is the South changing more than the North? That is up to you guys to decide. Now, some cool stuff to look out for. In the West, category, we have Dances with Wolves, which is a Kevin Costner film, super long. Last I checked, it was free on YouTube, so check that out. It's got a lot of Kevin Costner butt in it, which is kind of weird, but still a good film. We have Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, HBO movie about the Native American Wars. Excellent film there. We have Tombstone, one of my favorite movies ever, which is about like the Old West kind of a attitude, tuberculosis, all that kind of stuff, violence. It's a fun movie. So check out those movies if you want some fun stuff with this unit. I hope you guys are doing those DBQs. I'll post some more soon so you can get some more practice on those things. Have a good rest of your week. Enjoy spring break. I'll see you guys.